Exciting news, you guys. Wild Ideas Worth Living is now available on YouTube. You can find our latest episodes uploaded there weekly, plus video clips with some of our guests that give you a peek behind the scenes. Check out all of the content at youtube.com/REI.
I'm racing some of the toughest races out there, and I think just the drive of I might be the first person showing up to these events with a blade and just opening the door and starting this conversation, because I know there's other people out there like me that are just waiting for an opportunity like this, and nobody's inviting them to these things. And I think I'm working on creating those invites, and I think once I show up to these events, hammer out these hard courses, then they can't avoid me.
Zach Friedley is a professional athlete who is changing the sport of trail running. Zach was born without most of his right leg and is often the only adaptive athlete at the starting line of some of the world's hardest races. There aren't a lot of running events with categories specifically for adaptive athletes, but Zach is on a mission to change that. I'm Shelby Stanger, and this is Wild Ideas Worth Living, an REI Co-op Studios production brought to you by Capital One. When Zach runs, he wears a prosthetic called a running blade. If you haven't seen one, a blade is lightweight and springy. It almost looks like a ski bent into the shape of an upside-down question mark. Zach tried a blade for the first time when he was in his 20s. He was at his prosthetist's office, and as soon as he put it on, he started running down the hallway. That moment was a turning point, and Zach immediately set his sights on making the national adaptive running team. Zach Friedley, welcome to Wild Ideas Worth Living. You've had a lot of wild ideas, so I'm really excited to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to share some stories and just maybe do a little deep dive.
So let's just talk about running. After you got your blade at 23, 24, did you immediately start running competitively?
Yeah. So back then, December of 2007 is when I got this, and 6 months later was the Beijing Paralympics. So my eyes and my goals were set to that. And even though it was a short window, there was still maybe a chance that I could make it. So I went to the trials, didn't make it, but was hooked. This was my path. I was gonna train for the next one, and I wanted to make a Paralympic team. And that was my new identity in this world.
Wow. Okay. So what did that look like training for the Paralympics?
It looked a lot like a guy who didn't know what he was doing, had too much of an ego to even get a coach, thought he could just do it on his own. Knowing what I know now, I'm what was this guy even thinking? 20-year-old Zach was just trying to prove himself worthy of being an athlete, or maybe even just being a human being. It was all subconscious, and we have our different coping mechanisms, and mine was just this mean, angry guy. And I wasn't mean or angry to anybody. I was mean and angry to myself. It was all internal. And it was just a lot of pressure and a lot of tension and just grinding and a lot of injuries. And I didn't know. I thought I was, no pain, no gain. Just keep doing this thing and it'll eventually work out, which it never did. I never reached that goal of being a Paralympian.
Well, I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing this with me, because I relate pretty deeply to your story in the sense that, back then, if you grew up in the 80s and the 90s, early 2000s, that was kind of the mantra we were told, no pain,
Totally.
No gain. You got to push it. You got to go hard. When I was a 20-year-old, I was crazy. I worked absurd hours. I ran absurd amounts until I broke myself. I didn't stop. But that was the message of society at the time. And it didn't work for a lot of us. A lot of us had to choose a different path. I found adventure and kind of chilled out. It sounds like you found nature as well in the form of trail running.
Yeah, 10 years later. It didn't happen right away. And after I crashed and burned, I gave up running and was not a runner.
That's really crushing. You had this big wild idea to make the Paralympic team. And you went for it. You gave up like 4 years of your life, or probably more, to make this happen.
8 years, 2 times.
8 years. That's a huge chunk of life to go after a goal and not get it.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like a failure, honestly. And then that's what kind of catapulted me into this next piece of my life. And that was leaving Kansas City and going on this vision quest to figure out who I was.
What did that look like?
Well, when it started to happen, I didn't sit down and say, Zach, we're going on a vision quest. But that's what it ended up being. I was depressed for many months. And I did wake up one day, literally woke up out of bed and was like, if I continue to do this, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive anymore. Something's got to change. I don't know how to change here. So the only thing I could think about was just like vacating, like just going somewhere. And the opportunity that presented itself was a really close family friend had just lost his wife, and he had 2 daughters that were a 7th grade and freshman. They had just moved to Philadelphia, and he was a big executive and travels all the time and didn't have anybody to take care of the girls. And at the funeral, I basically said, I'll do it. It's me. And I said that on a Thursday or a Friday and flew to Philadelphia on a Monday.
Okay, this is a really interesting vision quest. And I appreciate that it's not like I took ayahuasca in the jungle and, you know, that's fine if that's what your vision quest is. But it sounds like you had like this divine sort of thing happen in your life where, you know, you knew you needed to make a change. Someone offered you a chance to go be of service to someone and help mentor these young women, which is really cool.
Yeah, it gave me purpose for a year, and it was very challenging. You know, they just lost their mom and they were grieving, and I was lost in my life, but they depended on me every day to take them to school, cook them food, go to parent-teacher conferences, problem solve. They were starting to date guys, and I was like, this is all crazy. Like, you know, it was a lot.
Teenage girls, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, every day I was on all the time. Like there was not really a day off. You know, I couldn't be like, well, I don't feel like it today. Figure it out on your own. So it was just every day getting up, helping them with homework, cooking food, taking them to lacrosse practice, or they would always sweet talk. They'd be like, Zach, we really want to go to Pinkberry. Please take us to get, they would be like, please, please, please. And then I'd be like, all right, let's go. So we get in the car and then we'd go get frozen yogurt or something. So it was just a lot of that all the time.
Okay, so you're living in Pennsylvania. Then how did trail running come into all this? You'd given up running.
Yeah, well, trail running didn't happen even then. I basically moved from Philly because I didn't really like the East Coast too much. The girls were done with school and I didn't really want to stay in Philly by myself. So I had this opportunity to come to this place called Humboldt County, California, to work on a farm. And I didn't have a lot of details except for it's remote, it's hard work, but you can make a lot of money. And I said, yeah, let me do it. So I drove all the way across the country and got to San Francisco. And I thought like it was maybe going to be like an hour away, but it's like where I was working was like 6 hours away from civilization up in these mountains in Humboldt with nothing. And it was a shock. I lived in the back of my truck for 6 months working on this farm, doing the hardest work I've ever done in my life. And that's kind of where the blade came back out again, because I needed some sort of equipment to move around these mountains. You know, I was pumping water, I was watering things, I was moving. So I improvised my blade and stuck a shoe on the bottom of it and duct taped it and was moving around the hill. So that was what was the first like drop of, oh, this is pretty cool. Moving around, using your body in the outdoors, in the mountains. And then a couple years later, I moved to Mendocino, where I live now, started working with the shaman, and we did a lot of body work, transformational body work. And in that process, I processed a lot of trauma that I didn't even know I had. I had a new relationship with my body, and I had this blade that had a shoe duct taped to the bottom of it. And I found myself after a lot of these sessions going to this beach and just running around and doing like crazy stuff in the middle of the night, just moving my body, not trying to win anything, not trying to prove anything. Just, hey, I got a human body and I got this piece of equipment. Let's go move. And so I did that for a while. And then I ended up at this event called Born to Run in 2019. And that's where my life changed.
Born to Run is a well-known book written by Chris McDougall, who happens to be a dear friend and mentor of mine and Zach's. When the book came out, it sparked a running movement around the world. It was also the inspiration for an event of the same name. Since 2010, the Born to Run Festival has taken place in Southern California. It's been described as a combination between a race and a party. The event was created by the famous ultra runner Luis Escobar, who ended up being a pretty important person in Zach's life. In 2019, Zach attended Born to Run for the first time as a volunteer. But at the event, he was inspired to sign up for a 10-mile trail run on the spot, something he'd never done before. Crossing that finish line changed Zach's life. Until then, he'd only run on tracks, paved sidewalks, and roads. He never realized that he could run on dirt trails in forests. Your first time trail running, I just would love for you to dive in and tell me what that felt like for you.
It felt like freedom. It felt like liberation. It felt like a kid in a candy store turned loose, except it was a 33 or 34-year-old man turned loose into the outdoors. And I remember crossing the finish line and thinking about all the national parks I'd ever been to in my vehicle, just driving through and being like, oh, what a cool mountain, or oh, Yosemite, awesome waterfall. And now I'm going back to these places, parking the car, and I'm going to go run through these things. I'm going to go just be like a primal dude running through nature. And that's pretty much what I did. Like the next month I went to Yosemite, tried to run to the top of El Capitan, had no water. I didn't know anything. Got like halfway and one of the rangers was like, bro, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm running to the top, man. He's like, where's your water and stuff? And I'm like, I don't have any. And he's like, I really love this energy that you got, man, but it's 100 degrees. You need water. Maybe you try this a different time. And he turned me around and they gave me like a lifetime pass to all the national parks. But that was just how like eager and hungry I was. It's like turning a kid in a candy store.
I love your story. I love how you describe what happened, and I can imagine exactly you going up to El Capitan and the ranger being like, what the heck is this guy doing? Okay, so you went to Yosemite, and then at what point do you decide, like, I'm going to compete? Was it at one of Lewis's events?
Yeah, I think after doing one of Lewis events, it was this 25K somewhere up in Northern California, Quincy, California. And I just felt this big pull to come back to one of his events. And we reconnected. I hadn't seen him in like 2 or 3 years. And Lewis and I didn't really talk a lot the first time I was there. We acknowledged each other, but it wasn't really like a friendship yet. And then when I saw him again at his other event, he said, dude, I got to have you on my podcast. I got to know what the hell's going on. Like, who are you? You know, you keep coming to my events. I just want to know who you are.
But the story of that is that he saw you like basically crawl across the finish line.
Well, yeah, I had to crawl up this big hill. Lewis is known. He's got this reputation in the trail running race director world where he puts some crazy things on a course. And people, like, he's always like, if you're coming to PR your 50K, probably not doing it in my event. And at this particular race, he had this thing that he called the bunny hill. And it was not a bunny hill. It was off trail. And I had to crawl. I had to crawl like a mile up this trail. And somebody was hidden in the trees taking photos for the event. And they saw me crawling up this thing and sent the picture to Lewis. And then Lewis came out on his motorcycle like an hour or two later as I was running through this other section. And he was like, dude, I feel kind of like an asshole for having that there. But you did this thing and like you're running and you're like smiling and I want to know more about you. So that was what started our friendship. And it was pretty much the connection that I needed to make in trail running. Lewis opened up so many doors for me, which therefore create opportunities for other people. And he's just been like my guardian angel in trail running. He was the first.
So what was your first race like? Did you win?
I mean, I raced against people with 2 legs. So winning to me was finishing. Like finishing with no injuries, finishing and being able to do it again the next day. That was like what winning was. And that's kind of where it's been for a while, but we're hopefully moving the needle in the right direction in trail running to one day you'll have athletes with disabilities racing each other.
I'm really curious. What does it feel like racing for you? And like, how then did you decide that that was going to be your purpose?
I think I just kept on following like whispers from the universe. You know what I mean?
I call those trail signs. Yeah.
Yeah. And they led me to these really interesting places, and I'm open to these experiences, and I'm open to meeting the people. And now, when I pick out races, I'm racing some of the toughest ones out there. And I think just the drive of like, first off, I might be the first person showing up to these events with a blade and just opening the door and like starting this conversation. Cause I know there's other people out there like me that are just waiting for an opportunity like this, and nobody's inviting them to these things. And I'm working on creating those invites, because right now in trail running, if you're a man or a woman, you're being invited. Well, they're not doing that for the disabled community yet. And I think once I show up to these events, hammer out these hard courses, then they can't avoid me.
Well, and your wild idea of like actually going and doing it allows other people to see like, hey, that guy kind of looks like me. I can go do this too.
Totally.
And like visibility is really important.
100%. I get messages a lot from people that are like, I didn't know. Nobody told me. I saw your post. This is amazing. Do you have any tips or suggestions? And then my brain started moving more, and these conversations started happening with Lewis. And Lewis is like, well, why don't you be the guy that does it? Why don't you start an event? Lewis actually named it Born to Adapt. Lewis texted me one day and said, what do you think of Born to Adapt? And I'm like, oh my God, I love it. And things are really moving. We got some races later this year in the US that are actually catering to adaptive athletes, and we're going to have adaptive athletes on mountain courses.
Born to Adapt is a nonprofit that creates trail races and training clinics for adaptive athletes. When Zach isn't planning events and working with race coordinators to make ultra marathons more accessible, he's out on the trail running. He's done several ultras, a 50K in Zion, a 50 miler in Sonoma, and he has more planned for this year. When we come back, Zach talks about his experience running the Ultra Tour de Mont Blanc and how his mental game has changed over the course of his running career. Hey Wild Ideas listeners, I have good news. REI and Capital One have partnered together to support the shared mission of creating a more equitable outdoors. Through the REI Co-op MasterCard program, Capital One and REI have donated $3 million to the REI Cooperative Action Fund. That donation supports more than 200 nonprofit organizations across the country working to create a more equitable outdoors for everyone. If you want to find REI Fund grantees in your community and learn more about the amazing work they're doing, visit reifund.org/grantees. That's reifund.org/grantees. And to learn more about the REI Co-op MasterCard program, go to rei.com/MasterCard-podcast. That's rei.com/MasterCard-podcast. We'll include both links in the show notes. Terms apply. Hey Wild Ideas listeners, summer's here and it's gonna be a hot one. Stay hydrated with GOO Hydration Tabs. With just a drop and a fizz in your bottle, they replenish sodium, the primary electrolyte you lose when you sweat. They're easy to carry and available in 6 tasty flavors, like strawberry lemonade and tropical citrus. Need energy on the go? Try GOO Energy Chews. These bite-sized gummies come in convenient packs that fit in your pocket with carbs to give you energy, electrolytes to hydrate, and amino acids to protect your muscles. It's going to be a wild summer, so stay hydrated and energized with GOO Hydration Tabs and GOO Energy Chews. Available now at your local REI or rei.com. Zach Friedley is an adaptive runner who has found joy and freedom on the trails. In 2022, he launched a nonprofit called Born to Adapt, and he's worked with several high-profile races to make it easier for adaptive athletes to compete. Zach's goal is to open up the sport to anyone who wants to participate, no matter their ability. As an athlete, Zach really leads by example. He's competed in ultramarathons all over the world. In fact, in 2022, he competed in his first ultra Tour de Mont Blanc, also known as the UTMB. It is perhaps the most famous ultramarathon out there. UTMB was one of your first races that was really, really big that you did, which is huge. When did you do the UTMB? And for those who don't know, can you just tell people what it is?
Yeah, so UTMB is what most trail runners would call the Super Bowl of trail running. It's 1 week in Chamonix, France. They have events from a youth 10K all the way up to 176K, which is like 106 miles around Mont Blanc through Switzerland, France, and Italy. The distance that I did was a 42K, and they called it a fun run, 42K through the Alps. But I'll tell you, this fun run
does not sound fun.
The fun run had cutoffs. The fun run had world champions racing in it. I mean, it was serious. It's a hard race. I did it first in 2022. Didn't make the first cutoff. The cutoff is 2 hours, and you got to go about 8 to 9K with maybe 1,500 to 2,000 feet of climbing, maybe closer to 3. And I missed the cutoff the first time I was there by about half an hour, and they cut my bib and kicked me out of the race. You know, that's just part of the rules. The rules are made for people with 2 legs. It just is what it is. And the next day, after I was sitting there for a minute, I decided I'm going to do UTMB MCC 2023, and I'm going to train every day, and we're going to make this happen.
After Zach's first attempt at UTMB, he started working with well-known running coach Eric Orton and dedicating a lot of his time to training. Zach is sponsored by On Running, and the brand has helped him customize his running blade so that it works better on rocky terrain. He even moved to Chamonix, France for the 8 weeks before the race so he could train on the course and be as ready as possible. I want to talk about your training because you improved your time so much in just a year. What sort of things did you do to train that changed the game for you?
We started working on my running gait and my running cadence. So we just started to dissect all that and to improve these little metrics. And that translates to being a better runner and covering more ground and being more efficient, your body, lasting longer. So we just kept on working at this every single day. And, we improved. I improved, and I'm still improving, and it's fun.
It is really fun. What else did you change that you think really impacted you that, other runners, if they're listening, could maybe take with them to use in their own running?
Yeah. As a trail runner, we're on trails, we're in mountains, and that's pretty much primarily all my races. But I do a lot of training on track. So I'm increasing my speed. I'm doing a lot of speed work. I'm doing a lot of things that translate well to trail running. And it's, 6-7 days a week. And it's a lot of recovery too. Checking in with my body, seeing how I feel, making sure I'm eating right, sleeping right, utilizing nutrition on runs, and just fine tuning it over and over and over and over and over again. It's a lot of just trial and error. And
you also have this partnership with On Running. And I'm just curious how they've technically helped you with your blade, because you're only wearing one shoe.
So they got this thing in Zurich called the On Labs, and you can produce something real time. And I basically brought in the shoes I was wearing and the problems I was having out there, and we just kind of pieced together certain items. I'd go test them. I made videos on each tread, here's what I liked about this one. This one didn't work because of this. So a lot of feedback is coming. And then we built this one for UTMB that's a prototype, and it changed the game. If it wasn't for that piece of tread, I think the mud would have probably ended my day. It would have been over.
So wait, it was tread on the shoe?
Yeah, so it's basically like a shoe that slides over the blade, and there's different applications that you can put on this tread. So like I have a walking around airport one. It's the same blade. So I'm a little bit unique. I wear my running blade 24/7, and that is my personal preference. It's because I run so much and I run on terrain that's unforgiving. So I need my gait to be locked into my brain and my mind. I can't go back and forth between a walking leg and a running leg. On helps with the bottom pieces, the tread. So I got a couple different options. Most of my options are for, as you can see, huge lugs on the end of this for running in the mud. They're 4 millimeters. And I go through a tread on a normal training cycle once a month minimum. These things get put to the test. And without it, I don't know if it'd work.
A year later, you tried UTMB again. How did your second attempt go?
I couldn't think past that day. Like the race is on a Monday, nothing else. It was just like pure dedication to that day. And I ended up finishing this time. I knew it was going to be a good day after I got to the first checkpoint, and I was an hour under the time.
Because the first time you were 30 minutes over.
Yeah. And it was the craziest weather ever. It was raining and snowing and like 40 degrees in the summer. So I ended up running in rain and snow and mud and still had a better performance than I did the first time I did it.
Zach's dedication to training paid off. His second UTMB attempt was a massive success. Since then, Zach has worked with the race organizers to implement better accommodations for adaptive runners. For example, this time, Zach had a pacer, which is someone who ran with him to help set the pace. That allowed Zach to focus more on his mindset and technique rather than just his speed. It sounds like your mental game has changed a lot over the years. Also, no pain. Like you have more fun.
Yeah, I have a lot more fun. I enjoy it. Instead of grinding, I mean, there's a grind. It is tough, but I feel like I'm being pulled rather than, like a combustion engine that's like burning something. Like I got so much to do at all times. Like my list is endless. Like I accomplished 3 things on the list and 5 more appear. So the list is never complete ever. And that's all right. So I build it into my schedule of like this day, this time, phones off. Zach is Zach. Nothing's immediately going to collapse today. I'm taking this time for myself and I'm off the radar for 4 to 8 hours, maybe a whole day. And those days I come back the next day ready to go again, So it's like pushing for 4 or 5 days, taking a day, pushing for 4 or 5 days, taking a day. That way I don't burn out and I'm able to keep this energy flowing.
What I love is that even if you fail, you're not afraid to go back and try again.
Yeah. So I used to think failure was bad, right? Like if you fail, you suck or you're a loser or something. But I think now failure is just you're getting more information on something you're trying to do, and then you can change your approach and do it again differently, and then a little bit differently and a little bit differently. So failure isn't failure. I think the real failure is not showing up. So if you show up and something doesn't go to plan, that's all right. Take that information and change what you're doing and then try it again. I just know that if I don't show up, like how am I going to feel? Like that feeling, I don't want that feeling. And I kind of curate my life based around like how I want to feel or how I want to make other people feel, so I have to show up. Like there's no other option.
Over the course of his life, Zach has faced plenty of failure. But with perseverance, he's been able to become a better runner and open doors for so many others. Of course, his work isn't done. If you want to see what Zach is doing next, follow him on Instagram at Trailblader. That's TrailBlader. And you can find out more about Born to Adapt at borntoadapt.org. If you liked this episode, check out our interview with Nicole Verkeilen. Her organization, Forest Stump, is working to increase access to medical equipment for people with disabilities so that they can be physically active. You can find the link to that episode in our show notes. Wild Ideas Worth Living is part of the REI Podcast Network. It's hosted by me, Shelby Stanger, produced by Annie Fassler, Sylvia Thomas, and Sam Piers-Nitzberg of Puddle Creative. Our senior producers are Jenny Barber and Hannah Boyd. Our executive producers are Paolo Motola and Joe Crosby. As always, we love it when you follow the show, take time to rate it, and write a review wherever you listen. And remember, some of the best adventures happen when you follow your wildest ideas.